You can go back and watch my reviews and hear me say, I bet you the director's cut will be better. So all you Snyder fans that want to talk about it, I watched it, I'm here, so don't yell at me, let's just talk about it. Rebel Moon stars Sofia Boutella and is about when a peaceful settlement on the edge of a distant moon finds itself threatened by a ruling force, a stranger living among its villagers becomes their best hope for survival. From director Zack Snyder, who brought you part 1 and 2 of Rebel Moon, comes his director's cut. So, if you don't know about Zack Snyder, most of his movies have director's cuts. Usually all of them, but like the one that's the most famous is of course Justice League, because the one we got in theaters was ass. But then he came out on HBO Max and released a 4-hour cut of the Snyder cut of Justice League, and it was awesome, honestly. It was like a huge difference, and it made a lot of money for HBO Max, and like everyone was talking about it. So Netflix said, hey, this Rebel Moon idea, we want you to make it, but we want part 1 and 2 to be PG-13, and then 5 months later we'll release the Snyder cut, kind of like what they did. So that's what Netflix is doing. They're trying to do what HBO Max did and get more money and all that kind of stuff, and it's been out for 10 days, and apparently it did not do that for Netflix. So dumbasses, great job, because I'm here to tell you, Rebel Moon, the director's cut, is better. Is it better than the other versions? Clear and simple answer, yes. Now, I won't say that, like, if you're not a Snyder fan, this is 7 hours of part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is 3 hours and 25 minutes, and then part 2 is, like, almost 3 hours long. So it is just almost 7 hours of one movie. And yes, I'm reviewing both movies for this one review because I don't want to make 2 videos. Sorry. So let's talk about it. Zack Snyder, listen, visually, I mean, I said it in my reviews for The Rebel Moons, he's just a visionary. Seriously, he can just take the camera and make a nice picture. Like, there are so many shots throughout this entire 2 movies that I'm just like, you really did just create a picture, and it looks very good. And I will admit, as a person that likes action movies and sci-fi, seeing the R-rated blood action, to me, made a difference, because it felt more grisly, it felt more dark, because like in part 1, we get so much more of our main villain, and my god, does it make him more evil. Like, watching those original PG-13s, I was like, he's an okay villain, he's got evil aspects. Nah, these movies make him like, damn, he's a harsh-ass villain, and he's really good. He's evil. I hope he dies. And so watching this movie and seeing the extended scenes and seeing how this world is more fleshed out in more scenes, it makes the experience better. So going into part 1, my biggest issue with the PG-13 cut was we went to planet to meet characters, and they joined the group, and they never bonded. I'll still admit that is the same storytelling in this movie. And so it kind of feels like when it comes to more to the group dynamic, I still don't feel like they're a great team. Like, I do say each character gets more moments. They get more time with our audience to watch this movie and be like, okay, I like your aspect. I like your point of view. I like where you're coming from. But like the number one character that for sure becomes interesting is our main one, Sofia Boutella. 100%. After watching these movies, I'm like, yeah, she's a great character. She's good in this movie. She had a good performance in the PG-13 cuts, but these 2 movies, especially part 1, she becomes an awesome main character. I'm like, this is what we wanted. And then the more of the team that you meet and you get to see more of them, yeah, I'm like, okay, I like you now. Like, Anthony Hopkins' robot, completely awesome character now. In the original cut, I was like, he's cool, he's got cool aspects. This movie, you get to see those aspects, and you get to see and visually see a lot more, because in part 2, they do flashbacks still, but in part 1, when you first introduce him to the movie, it's so much better, and it's just like, why? Why not just release these movies? Because you just screwed yourself, because those originals had like millions of views, and then this one's had like 5 million, I read on Twitter. Like, it's just so low. And so going into part 1, I will admit as well, part 1 is 3.5 hours long, and it was long. I felt the runtime. And when you go into different planet to different character, it messes up the pacing. And so for it to be 3.5 hours, it felt so damn long. But I was like what I was seeing. I like the characters. I like the situations that we got to see from the original movie. Get way more expansion in this one. Adding that grisly blood effects makes the movie more visceral and dirty. And there's also like a 4-minute softcore porn scene. I mean, it's a sex scene, but like, I don't think it needed to be almost 5 minutes long with Sofia Boutella. I'm like, cool. I don't understand why we needed a sex scene. It's the same thing with part 2. It's like near the beginning, it's like 5 minutes of a softcore sex scene. I'm like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I mean, it's great to look at as a guy, but like in the story, in the movie, I'm like, we didn't really need it. But again, as a guy, I'm not gonna complain. So for part 1, it's honestly a tremendous step up. I will say, part 1 is a better movie. Part 2, on the other hand, I'm not gonna lie. Yes, the visuals of all the action from the original movie in part 2, with the director's cut having more blood, is honestly cooler. I will admit, it's just cooler in my opinion. But I still think the entire hour and a half now of our final act being a huge battle, fun, great visuals, all that's in this movie. I still think them doing flashbacks of our characters from the first part into part 2 and doing more expansion on that one felt the runtime. It was 3 hours and an hour and a half of it was action. And I feel like part 2 still felt like a script that like could have been a TV show. Honestly, for both parts, but part 2 more felt like if we had like a season's worth, because a lot of like what you're trying to do with these characters and their flashbacks would have been good in part 1, because what you do in part 1 is give way more of their dynamic in present time. Part 2, they do flashbacks. I'm just like, I don't understand the writing process for that, and it just really affected the runtime, because again, both these movies are fucking long, and I felt the runtime, at least for I did. But I will admit, for part 2, even though I don't think it's a tremendous step up like part 1 is, I will say part 2 is more enjoyable for me, and it still feels like more of like a script issue for both parts. It just feels like maybe if you gave Zack Snyder like 2 or 1 good writer for these movies, and he worries about the visuals and the storytelling like a director should, I feel like this movie could have been way better. So at the end of it, after watching almost 7 hours of Rebel Moon, I can say these are better. They're visually better, in my opinion. Zack Snyder is a very visual director, and it's more proven with all the blood and all of the aspects that he gets to bring with our character arcs, and it's way better in these movies. But I still think TV show could have worked, and like I said, the run times are felt. Some of the character dynamics in part 2, I feel it could have worked in part 1, and in the end, Rebel Moon, I'll admit, the director's cut is better. So for Rebel Moon's director cut part 1, I'm gonna give it a B-. Then for part 2's director's cut, I will give a C. Alright, Snyder fans, are you happy? Because you guys, man, that fandom that's toxic. Okay, you guys are toxic sometimes, so don't come at me. I reviewed it, I watched it, good enough for me. You happy? Whew, it really did. Like, I had to sit there and wait. I was like, all right, what is everyone saying before I put myself through these movies? Because again, those PG-13 cuts, they just weren't for me. But these movies are better, and they should have been the first ones released. Let's not keep doing director's cut of them being released second. Put out his imagination first. All right, so let me know what you guys think. Are you gonna watch it? Do you think you should watch it? I think if you're a fan of the other or if you're a fan of the movies or Snyder, give it a watch. If you didn't like the PG-13 cuts, maybe, but it's long. So I hope you guys enjoy this movie review. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, everybody.